It could be said that while the Ukrainian government remains steadfast in the fight against Russia, Kiev has also been confronting another enemy that has been gnawing within the country for years: corruption. Roots of the Ukrainian corruption arise from the Soviet nature of the Ukrainian political leaders who used to be integrated into the communist ruling elite before the collapse of the Soviet Union. So corruption has been a long-standing issue in Ukraine, with widespread reports of bribery and other corrupt practices among government officials, law enforcement agencies and businesses. Since regarding independence from Russia, Ukraine has faced a series of politicians, criminal bosses and oligarchs who used corruption of police, political parties and industry to gain power. In the post-Soviet period, Ukraine never fully privatized many large industrial enterprises, and the resulting state-owned or partially state-owned companies became easy targets for graft. The country had troubled business political ties to Russia and the Kremlin, with Ukrainian businessmen allowed a bonanza of profits, trading in Russian natural gas in exchange for promoting Russian interests through bribery and subsidies to pro-Russian news media outlets. The greatest and most violent corruption in Ukraine is in the area of Donbass, and that is connected with materials, industry, tourism and ports. For instance, in 2005, mass graves from the 1990s with businessmen, judges, lawyers, investigators were discovered in Donetsk. In daily life, bribes are given just to ensure that public services are delivered either in time or at all. The highest corruption levels were found in vehicle inspection, 57.5%, the police, 54.2%, healthcare, 54%, the courts, 49%, and higher education, 43.6%. Also, the justice system is compromised, and the government has been over-controlling and non-transparent. Civil society has not been strong either. While the US, EU and NATO have pledged to continue assisting Ukraine, some politicians and military officials in the West have pointed to corruption in the country and questions whether Ukraine was a good manager of the assistance it has received. As the country urges its allies to provide money and equipment to aid its defense, the government must provide that the funds won't go to waste. Fighting corruption is also a cornerstone for Ukraine to gain EU membership. In June 2023, the European Commission recommended that Ukraine, and I quote, further strengthen the fight against corruption, in particular at high level, through proactive and efficient investigations and a credible track record of prosecutions and convictions. End of quote. Before membership, candidate countries are required to undertake several political, economic and rule of law reforms to match EU standards. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is well aware of both the criticism from the West and the importance of keeping aid flowing. And I quote him, "I want this to be clear. There will be no return to what used to be in the past." End of quote. Transparency International ranked Ukraine as the second most corrupt country in Europe in 2021, behind only Russia. Zelensky campaigned on a promise to fight corruption and has taken several steps since taking office in 2019 to address the issue. So, over the years, there have been various efforts to combat corruption in Ukraine, including the establishment of the anti-corruption agencies, the implementation of anti-corruption laws, and the prosecution of corrupt officials. The Ukrainian government has implemented a number of reform efforts, most notably in the aftermath of 2014 Revolution of Dignity, in which major protests led to the ouster of President Viktor Yanukovych, whose extravagant mansions became a symbol of embezzlement at the highest level of power in Ukraine. These reforms later included the establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, or NABU, which is tasked with investigating and preventing corruption among high-ranking officials and prepares them for prosecution. Those corruption reforms have seen some successes. Police reform, public procurement and dissolution of state-owned industries since 2014 have led to reduced waste and corruption. NABU has been involved in a number of high-profile cases, including the investigation of former President Petro Poroshenko. Civil society, too, has worked hard to raise the standards, and polls show that public tolerance of corruption has fallen sharply. People do not approve ministers living large, when others are making large sacrifices. Another important anti-corruption institution in Ukraine is the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, or SEPO, which works in conjunction with NABU to prosecute corrupt officials. In addition, the National Agency of Prevention of Corruption, or NAPC, was established in 2015 to prevent corruption in public procurement and to oversee the declaration of assets by public officials. In addition, Zelensky has pushed for reforms aimed at increasing transparency and reducing opportunities for corruption. For example, he has advocated for the implementation of e-governance and the digitalization of public services to reduce opportunities for bribery and extortion, capitalizing on the existing Estonian experience, assisted by the EU and its member states Denmark, Estonia, Germany, Poland, Sweden and Slovenia. Ukraine too has become now a place that makes data run, not people. Zelensky has also supported the establishment of an independent anti-corruption court in 2019 and has since made several high-profile rulings against corrupt officials. Zelensky has also taken steps to address the corruption within law enforcement agencies, including dismissing corrupt officials and increasing the salaries of police officers to reduce the incentive for bribery. In 2019 presidential elections, he made steps to get rid of bribery in government, such as stripping members of parliament of immunity from prosecution. In terms of legislation, Ukraine has implemented a number of anti-corruption laws in recent years, including a law on electronic assets declarations, which requires public officials to declare their assets and income electronically. The country has also introduced legislation on whistleblower protection and the protection of journalists who report on corruption. In January 2023, the biggest shake-up of Zelensky's government happened since Russia's invasion. President Zelensky fired many senior Ukrainian officials due to the corruption scandal linked to the procurement of wartime supplies. Several senior officials, including 5 provincial governors, lost their jobs. Deputy Defense Minister Vyacheslav Shapovalov and Deputy Head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Kirill Tymoshenko, also resigned at the same time. According to allegations, Ukraine's defense ministry was buying military provisions, including food for the troops, at inflated prices. A statement posted on the defense minister's website said that Shapovalov, who was responsible for the logistics of the armed forces of Ukraine, had submitted his resignation after a campaign of accusations which the ministry said was unfounded and baseless. The National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine has also accused Vasyl Lozhinsky, the acting minister for regional development, of receiving $400,000 in unlawful benefits for facilitating contracts, including for power generators, a sensitive issue in the country that is struggling to cope with freezing temperatures and frequent power cuts caused by Russia's attack on its infrastructure. Zelensky's deputy chief of staff, Kirill Tymoshenko, announced his resignation on his Telegram account on Tuesday morning after Ukrainian media reported he was using a vehicle meant for humanitarian purposes and evacuations to go to business trips. Previously, Zelensky's government had made a string of dismissals, mostly for relatively minor lapses of judgment or tone deafness. For example, driving expensive cars or vacationing abroad. But those January cases included serious accusations of graft and official abuse. I quote, "Today is a fruitful day for our country," Zelensky said in an overnight address to the nation. Zelensky said, "Change as much as necessary to ensure that people do not abuse power," end of quote. Zelensky announced he was banning government officials from traveling abroad on anything but official business and said he would be making personnel changes in the coming days. He emphasized that the anti-corruption crackdown would focus primarily on domestic military procurement. None of the criminal investigations and the dismissals of officials touched on the billions of dollars in foreign aid or weapons transferred to the Ukraine from its Western allies. Zelensky highlighted that contrast in his speech, saying the strict control now applied to foreign military aid should be a model for military contracting within Ukraine. I quote, "Any domestic supply, any procurement, everything must be absolutely as clear and honest as the external supply for our defense," end of quote. He said he would seek cleanliness of process in defense ministry and army. In another investigation into a political ally of Zelensky, the government's National Agency on Corruption Prevention said in a statement that a criminal investigation had been opened into a deputy head of the parliamentary arm of Zelensky's political party, Pavlo Kalimon. Ukrainian journalist had earlier reported that Kalimon had purchased a luxurious home in Kiev that cost far more than his salary would allow. Whatever the government's motivation in ordering the crackdown, it drew praise from the analysts who have for years vented frustration at the slow pace of anti-corruption activity. The action would, and I quote, send a strong signal to push on with early EU accession, end of quote. However, there have been some concerns about the pace and effectiveness of Zelensky's anti-corruption efforts, with the critics arguing that progress has been slow and that some of the reforms have been watered down or stalled in the face of resistance from vested interests. Nevertheless, the Ukrainian government under Zelensky continues to prioritize the fight against corruption, and there are indications that progress is being made in some areas. Presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak said on Twitter that the changes within the government showed Zelensky was committed to fighting corruption. Zelensky's personal decisions testify to the key priorities of the state. No blind eyes, he wrote. During the war, everyone should understand their responsibility. The president sees and hears society, and he directly responds to a key public demand: justice for all. End of quote. Tackling corruption is still a key to Ukraine's ambition to join the European Union in the future. Although Ukraine officially became an EU candidate state last year, Brussels has made it clear that Kiev will need to step up its fight against corruption if it wants to become a full member. Anna Pisonero, a spokesperson for the European Commission, said that while she could not comment on ongoing criminal matters, the Commission does welcome, of course, the fact that Ukrainian authorities are taking these issues seriously. In summary, despite these efforts, corruption remains a significant issue in Ukraine for a while, and there have been concerns about the independence and effectiveness of some of the anti-corruption institutions. However, there have also been some positive developments, such as the successful prosecution of some high-ranking officials, which suggests that the process is being made in fight against corruption. The head of the parliamentary faction of Zelensky's political party, David Arkamia, wrote that the country in wartime will change. If anybody is not prepared for change, then the government will come and help them change. My friends, I will now read you 5 Patreon names. Göran Hallström, Tale Morris, Oscar Ramos. For the 10th time I will say your name because you resubscribe every time. I don't mind. Joel Hitfield, Patrick Koilins. Thank you to these Patreons. If you enjoy my content, the Patreon link is in the description below. If you like my channel, subscribe to it, and until my next video, my friends, Slava Ukraini.